Can you give us a practical example of how you reflected on your own habit as a teacher?
Maybe I got to tell you something about my life. I was born and raised in Western Germany in a Catholic family, from a white middle class family, without any academic background. And then I went to Berlin. And I'm teaching there in a school where most of my students have a complete different background on all levels, or most levels, let's say. And when I was first teaching there, I had to relearn many things because entering with my habitus, the way I was socialized, didn't work out very well on many levels, because there were lots of misunderstandings, lots of biases, for sure, from my side. And so I was trying to understand better how I was raised and how my students were raised. And also they have different families and different backgrounds in one class, so maybe 25 or 26 different ways. But it was very, very obvious to me that I couldn't just put my own socialization on theirs, because they were just so different. So that was the first point, the starting point, to be aware that maybe each and everyone is different. And the person I was starting with then was myself, to see, okay, how am I different, if you want so? And I was trying to talk to my colleagues about that, and I was also trying to learn a little bit about classism, because that was the most important point when I reflect on my views that I have on my students. So what I did very concretely was first talk to other people that work with me. Then also I was visiting a seminar on classism in education or educational system, because it's a very strong oppression system actually, and as a teacher you're always on the powerful side of that. So asking myself, how can I use that power in a positive way for my students? And then also asking myself, how do I talk about my students? Because this is some kind of reproduction of how I see them. So first of all, how I talk about them with my colleagues. Just ask myself very concretely, when I come out of class, so when I finish a class and I go into the teacher's room, how do I talk? What do I say? Even if it's frustrating. What kind of behavior do I reproduce when I talk about them in a biased way also, without reflecting myself? And also, like in official teachers' meeting, how do you talk about what we see, what is happening in our schools? And for example, there's this very, let's say, famous, unfamous sentence of saying, in German you would say, das können wir mit unseren Schülern nicht machen. This is something you can't do with our students. So what does that mean? What does it mean about our view on our students, actually? And I would say in my school, during the last 10 years, this sentence has been said many times, but each and every year fewer times, because I think our views on our students also changed, and it's a process. It's nothing that happens from one day to the other. And the third thing, if we think about teacher habitus and also how we talk about our students, is not only how we talk inside school, but also outside school about it. So how do I talk to my own parents, to my own family, about how I work, what I see, and how I see my students? And this is also something that really, not completely, but really changed during my working experience of the last 10 years. When I think about it right now, how I talked about it 10 years ago, I have to admit I feel a little bit, at least, cringe or ashamed about it, because my view really changed. And this fits the whole discourse of how we talk about schools that in Germany say, you have the very ugly term of Brennpunktschulen that you would translate like, I don't know, like focus schools, because there are many problems that are focused in these schools and then in these students. But if you change the perspective and you take the students' perspective and their family's perspective, it's not a school in a socially deprived or marginalized area. It's not a school facing with lots of problems. It's also that, for sure. I don't live and teach in paradise, not at all. But for them, it's just a school, a normal school. So if you change the perspective on these schools and the discourse on it, then, I don't know if I'm clear here, but then you can also see the bias that you have, because it's a very normative way how you look at these schools and these students. And yeah, trying to change perspective and beginning with one myself actually has helped me.
What does teacher habitus mean?
Yeah, I think first of all it comes to the question what means habitus to answer this question, and I think it brings us to the theory of Pierre Bourdieu, who worked a lot on it, and I think it's about the appearance of a person, but not only how they are looking and so on, but it's more about their behavior, their beliefs, their knowledge, but also their prejudices, and it's about the internalization of social and cultural norms and practices who are dominated in their social class. So it's about how we think about other people, and how do we think about normality, for example, or how do we think, for example, how do we think and how is our construction of disability has a great influence on and how we act with people with disability, for example. And I think that makes it very interesting, or very interesting for the profession of teachers, because it leads us that the habitus had a great influence on our acting. It's not only what we think, it leads us of our practices in our acting, and not the normally acting, also the professional acting, and that's why it's very important to think about the teacher habitus. And I think it's very interesting to think about what Werner Helsper is working on this theme, because he differentiated the teacher habitus in 4 parts, and on the one hand it's the primary habitus, it's like the influence from the family and this basis or this starting point, and from this the developing of the individual habitus. It's influenced by which experience do you make in your biography, and what connections do you have to other social classes and experiences. So it can be a transmission from the primary habitus. And also the other 2 parts are like field specific. It's like on the one side the student's habitus, which is developed in the time we are students and which influences us. And on the other side our teacher's habitus, and he makes it very clear that they are all be very connected and influence as us at how we are teachers. For example, how do we think about students? What are our norms? What do we expect? What are our prejudices, bias on students? What do we value? How can we connect to the students and to their life world? How do we relate to them? And I find it very interesting, for example, the work of Andrea Lange-Wester, because he described 3 types of teacher habitus. On the one hand, personal responsibility and integration. On the other side, integration and equality opportunity. And the third thing is order and discipline. Because I find it interesting, because there you can see how to look on the students has a great influence. If my focus is on emancipation and autonomy, or is it on discipline and order, or perception of authority, it makes a great difference, I think.
So can you give us a practical example of why you think that it's important for you as a teacher to consider student habitus?
I will, yeah. So I'm a teacher currently teaching in Ireland in a junior class or a kindergarten class. And Ireland in recent years has gone through huge demographic change in terms of we were getting more families due to immigration, and the population communities have become more diverse, which includes our school communities as well. Us as teachers need to be able to accommodate and allow these children to succeed in this school environment. So for me, an example that instantly comes to mind would be a young girl who came from Serbia, who had little to no English and was finding the classroom environment quite uncomfortable due to her peers being able to speak English fluently. But I noticed over a couple of days, and through observing her, I noticed that she loved to draw during playtime. So over those next couple of days, I incorporated as much drawing as possible within my lessons, and I could see that she started to become more comfortable. She started to engage with others in her classroom as well. So as a result of that, we then used drawing to help her to begin her first steps in speaking English and coming to terms with the language. So for me, that was important to consider teacher habitus in that area and become an agent of change and allowing this young girl to succeed in the classroom environment.
Why is it important for me as a teacher to consider teacher habitus?
So each teacher is a person with his or her own values, ideas, culture, history. But we must always remember that in front of us in the classroom we have the most diverse students. So we should remember that we have to talk not only to those who are similar to us. We can't ignore that we are employed to build a more equitable society. We can be actor of change, but we can also produce and reproduce inequalities. Philippe Mérieux, in a recent work, asked if the school can still be democratic. So equity and inclusion are current issues, and as a teachers, a reflection on our stereotypes, on our value judgments, on our way to reading the reality is crucial to enter the classroom and be a teacher for every student, not only for the students who are similar to us. So it is a reflection on ourselves, but also a reflection on school culture, because equity and inclusion are systemic issues. So through the dialogue with other teachers, with school principals, we can build another school culture. We can transform the school culture and make the school a more equitable and inclusive environment.
And what is the status quo? What needs to change to achieve inclusion? Let's start from Ireland.
One of the interesting things that we have found across the 3 jurisdictions is the commonality in relation to the characteristics and the composition of teachers in our various different education systems. So in Ireland, inequity of opportunity to higher education can be seen in 2 really significant ways. One is that there's a very low representation of students from particular communities. That could be students with disabilities, students from disadvantaged socioeconomic backgrounds, students from different ethnic groups. But another more subtle way of identifying inequality is the actual characteristics of our teachers, because they hold such an influential position in our society. So in Ireland, both our current teachers and our emerging student teacher population are primarily white. They are Irish, they're female, they're settled, they're Roman Catholic, and they are middle class. And this is a significant issue for us. And just to give you an indication of the extent of the inequality or the gap between the diversity of our society in Ireland and the composition of our teachers, a study in 2015 indicated that 96% of our new entrant student teachers were and identified as white Irish. In the following year, that figure had risen from 96% to 98%. And that shows you, as was being discussed, the difficulty for students to see their own culture, their own identities represented in these very powerful positions in the classroom. In Ireland, the situation is considered to be so strategically important that the government has actually prioritised the entire third level sector to mobilise in order to broaden diversity in initial teacher education. And I think they're similar in Italy and in Germany.
Yes, Italian school tends to replicate the inequalities starting point of the students. Recently, Invalsi data have shown that students with low or medium socioeconomic and sociocultural background acquire low logical, mathematical and linguistic skills. So a privilege is transformed into merit. As far as the composition of teaching staff is concerned, also in Italy, for kindergarten and primary school, teachers are mostly female, but also in other school grades, the situation is almost the same. The cultural, religious and sexual orientation diversity is not represented, and there is a lack of studies in this field, because so we haven't sure data on these issues. As far as teacher education is concerned, for kindergarten and primary school teachers, there is a master degree course. Instead, for middle and high school, there are many disciplinary master degree courses that have to be accompanied by habilitation courses that aren't dealt with the continuity and are subject to continuous reform. So we have a school system open to all, as the Constitution says, but there is a big difference between law and students' experience.
Yeah, I think I can't add so many, because it's very many things are very similar in Germany. It's very university, for example, is a very exclusive and powerful space. So it's not easy to get access. So it's not easy to get access to teacher training. So you have to be successful in the school system, in this institution of school, to be later to be a teacher. So we also have mostly white middle class teachers in our schools, and not so many teachers with migration background, for example. Although we have a lot of people who studied teacher training in other lands and come to us, but they are not recognized as teachers. It's not easy to get them into the system, for example, to have role models for students with migration background, for example. And also, it's like you said, it's in primary school there are a lot of female teachers. I think it's because we think about the teachers in primary school as the goal is a lot of caring and not so academic knowledge. And in the secondary school, especially in Germany in the gymnasium, it's a lot about academic knowledge, and so there are a lot of more male teachers, and yeah.
Can you give us a practical example of the impact of teacher habitus on students?
I can give a very personal example. So I grew up as a child in a position where I was gendered differently from what I felt myself. And my teachers always asked the question, I think that's a question most teachers ask, is what do you want to be when you grow up? And my answer was always, I want to be a boy, I want to be a guy, I want to be a policeman, I want to be in Danish we also say fireman, like a firefighter man. And the teachers always told me, that's funny, what do you really want to be? And so my narrative kept being, I want to be a boy, I want to be a guy, I want to be a man. But it became almost like a weird joke because that was the way they translated my words all the time. And I still have this memory when I am in Danish, it would be 8th grade. So it's the grade before your last time, and then you have to go and do something else. And they were asking me, okay, soon the exams are coming. What do you want to be? What are we doing? What is the career path that you want to do? And I stubbornly said, I want to be a real dude. And my teachers were laughing, and my parents were laughing, and everyone was like, that's funny, because you have been giving this answer all the time, so we're all in on the joke at this point. What do you really want to be? And so I said, okay, if I can't be a real man, I'll just be disabled, and then I'll just cash in my disability check, because that's the only career path I see for me. And they were laughing at this as well, and they were like, haha, you'll be a comedian, and that was it. And I still remember that meeting ending with me having no clear path of what I want to do, and also not really feeling acknowledged. And it took me from that point when I went out of school, I was 16, because that's how we go out of school in Denmark. So I was about 16 till I was 21 before I dared to contact any professional and have a conversation about my want and dreams to want to have another body. And even when I contacted those professionals, I went into that room with laughing and with joking and trying to use humor as a way of talking about my position, because the only way I've learned to talk about it was with people laughing at me. Then when I went through transitioning and it went into trans groups, I felt very alienated because I wasn't sure I was supposed to be there, and I still had the memories of the teachers telling me that I was a joke coming back to me, and I felt like, okay, maybe I'm actually impostering upon this group. Maybe I don't belong because I couldn't transition, other people could. I was just joking about it. And to me, that's still like a strong, it's also my personal story, but it's also a strong narrative of why, because they were very controlled in their own ideas of what can happen. They didn't want to harm me. They just didn't really see that was even possible. I don't think they wanted, there was no ill intent. It was not because they were cruel or were politically involved in anything. Their mind view was just, this couldn't happen, so it was just a joke. Yeah, so that's my example.
What is the impact of teacher habitus on students?
Yeah, as we said, or I said, that the habitus has a great influence on our action as a teacher, as our professional action. It also leads us to the impact or the influence on students, because the way we think about students, it gets to them, it influences how can we relate to the students, how they feel in the environment, in the classroom, how they feel valued, and do they have a sense of belonging there. And for example, it has also an influence, what are our expectations? Are they very too low or too high, and do they feel discriminated because we as a teacher have prejudices and that influences them? And it's maybe difficult for teachers to understand the life world of a student which do not come from the same social class, so they don't feel connected to them, and this can be very intense and can lead to tensions. But also if there are similarities, it can be good to develop empathy for each other and to feel recognized as students, I think.
What are the challenges of engaging with your own teacher habitus?
I think, therefore, you have to understand that it's not only personal experience who has the influence of our habitus, it's also structure from society and so on. It's not easy to deal with it, and sometimes to think about this, it can be lead us to feel powerless, because school is also a very powerful institution with a lot of structures. It's very complex and a lot of traditions, and there's a school culture, and as one single teacher you can't change the whole system of the school, and so you can feel powerless, and it's very not easy to deal with it. And also it's I think it's very difficult to think about your own prejudices because you have a status, maybe it's you have a lot of privileges, and you can't think about perspectives you don't have, experience you didn't had, and so it's limited to think about your own habitus.
How can I reflect on my own habitus as a teacher?
So a lot of pages as written in pedagogy books about what it means to be a good teacher, how a teacher can answer to specific need of each student. The reality is that in a school classroom there is a high level of complexity. So there is a French word that is mixité that well describes this complexity. And John Dewey talks about reflexive action. So also the teacher learns by doing. There are ethical dilemmas, doubts, uncertainties, and the teacher has to reflect on the action, not on the idea of a medium child or an ideal boy or girl to think. And I think that in the school there should be moments of exchange between teachers. We have to promote peer review practice between teachers because with the dialogue they can discover more about themselves and their students. And this is important also about school culture, because with dialogue, with a confrontation between people, school can transform, rebuild, and also thinking about our project, all means all. The word all can have always more and more meanings. And as a teacher, we have to be ready to embrace all diversities, all uniqueness, without it turning into inequalities.
Through a better awareness of teacher habitus, what is the potential for me to support inclusion in the classroom and impact school culture?
So we've discussed, and through this chapter we will be writing about the importance of teacher habitus. And we've discussed both the impact on it from a teaching practice point of view, but also the challenges in exploring your own bias and prejudice. And I think what we're really, the conclusion that we're making, because teachers love strategies, they like the theory, but they want to know how to impact it in practice. And what we want to do is to give you a number of strategies that will help you to consider this. So the most important thing is to consider your own habitus, to reflect on it, interrogate it, and to challenge yourself. It can be very difficult, as we were discussing earlier, for children who are from a very different background, a very different social class, a very different ethnic background and culture, to see themselves reflected in teachers. But equally, it can be very difficult for a teacher to explore and value the background and experiences of other cultures and communities when it's outside of their own experience. So the first thing that we really think that teachers need to do is to be aware of the inequality, be aware of systems and structures, be aware of the fact that the representation amongst teachers is so different to the diversity of the community in society and in your classroom. Challenge your own biases, interrogate them. We all have them. The first part, I think, of making progress or transforming, as we were discussing earlier, is pulling your biases out into the light, acknowledging your own privilege as well as your own biases, and seeing what difference that makes in the classroom. It is possible to champion change within classrooms and within communities and within schools and in cultures. Interrogate why it is that we see difference as a deficit, and why it is that we individualize it and see it as located within an individual rather than within, very well established and historic structures which fundamentally privilege those with the greatest social, cultural and economic capital. So consider why we individualize difference, and think about ways in your school to celebrate diversity. Increasingly, it's recognized that a diverse school is an excellent school. So think about how you teach to everyone rather than just teaching to a specific community. Consider, for example, why there are lower academic expectations of certain schools and certain communities. We know, for example, that in all of these 3 jurisdictions, there are lower academic expectations for children with disabilities, not just by teachers. The children themselves have lower expectations of themselves, their parents have lower expectations of them, and their peers have lower expectations of them. And this is regardless of academic ability. Consider why that is, and how you could disrupt that narrative, how you can create a culture where there are high expectations for everyone in the school, and what that means and how you have to do that. Think about universal design for learning approaches in your classroom. If they work, share them with your community, because they will reach everyone rather than only reaching very specific groups of students. Consider how difference is inextricably connected to stigma and shame. Consider what it is like to be an individual who feels different, who feel stigmatized, and who often hide their identities. For example, very few teachers will openly state that they themselves have a disability. Very few. And yet we label our children and expect them, to thrive and to succeed in that environment. Think about language. Language can consolidate and reinforce negative stereotypes. So think about the language that you use and the language that you hear others using in the staff room, for example, and challenge the kind of language that you're using. Fundamentally, what we feel is that teacher habitus is almost a framework for excellence in teaching. Think about how you can understand difference, how you conceptualize and position it, celebrate difference, and then think about how a better understanding not only of your own habitus, but the habitus of your school, other teachers, and the children in your classroom. And we think that a greater examination of this can give you the potential to transform your educational community and to create greater opportunities and academic outcomes for everyone in the school.